Thank you. Appreciate that. So back to the shared screen. So here, now I see Anne-Marie is on the call. So Anne-Marie, can I ask you to read questions in the chat room if they come up after each slide? So this way I don't have to mention or miss that. So,
Okay.
And now I think we have a lot of the same audience, but on the April 29th workshop of eligible project reviews, we looked at a lot of information. So we reviewed what was eligible, what's not eligible, different project scenarios went over. We discussed legal considerations, alternate funding sources. We reviewed the timeline, how to break apart projects into multi-years. We talked about how the money gets allocated and the percentages and who gets 75% and a whole bunch of stuff. So we're not going to talk about any of that today. We're going to talk about the application and some follow-up information. So now at this point in the process, everybody should have a clearly defined project. You should have already engaged and worked with your architects and engineers, right? And you have final plans that you are in the process or have bidded already, right? So in the process now, you should be getting or have your contractor quotes. So that's where you should be at. And then once you have all those things, after all these wheels are in motion, you're ready to go ahead and complete the application. So this is where we're at today. And what we're going to do is we'll review this PowerPoint presentation to review some important information and updates. Then we'll talk about the specifics about completing the online application. Then we'll review 3 sets of documents: what gets uploaded to the application, what gets sent to RCLS, and what's the other one? And another one, which is uploaded. Oh yes, the online and what gets uploaded and sent. So, and throughout the grant application, there are some keywords that we have to keep in mind. And one of the keywords is this is not a grant, right? And we all use that when we're emailing me, and that's fine. But nowhere in the application should this say this is a grant. This is construction aid. And that language is important because several years ago, we were able to avoid meeting the minority and women-owned business requirements because this is not a grant and it's aid. So we want to support that. So before we look forward to this year, we've got to look back, right? Because there's a lot going on with current construction projects. In fact, there are 1, 2, 3 years. There's always 3 years worth of projects that are potentially open. And we have had an extension of 2 of them. So if your project number starts, well, I'm sorry, let me go back. Go back to the controls. So if your project starts with a 19, we applied for that in 2018, and the project number in the middle has 19. This is how you identify your projects, right? So this number, we got the extra year, so we have until June 30th. This was 34 million, so there's 17 projects that got funded. And then in 2019, with a project number of 2020, it was 34 million. That was also extended. Right? So you have until 2023. So this is 4 years on those 2. And that had the big dollar amounts. There was 18, I think, applications. And then last year, what we applied for in 2020 with the project number 21, we had the smaller amount and there was, I think, 7 applications. So there was no additional time. And now what we're looking at this year is projects that are 2022. And it's 34 million. So again, we're probably expecting 18 to 19 applications. So the 2019 projects, real quick, these are the people who got funded. This is the project number. So all of these projects have to be completed by the end of next year, right? And also just shows you that we always end up getting extra funds afterwards, which is very nice. And everybody but one library, I believe, got full funding, and full funding is 50 or 75%. Two libraries, the two biggest libraries. So Finkelstein got 59 when they were eligible for 75%, and Liberty got 60 when they're eligible for 75. And that's because they were the largest projects. And that's how I expect this to work out this year. Smaller projects will get funded 50% or 75%. Medium projects will most likely get the same thing. And then the larger projects. Next year, the 2020, these are the ones that need to be done in 2023, right? So you have a couple years left to do this. And then the following one is last year. So these have to be done by 2023 as well. Now, the interesting thing, and the thing that everybody needs to know about these things, is last year's projects haven't been approved yet, right? They're still in approval at DASNY. So RCLS has approved them. Division of Library Development goes through a whole review process, takes them about 3 to 4 months. And then DASNY reviews that, all the projects, takes about 3 to 4 months. There are several questions. I'm probably able to answer 90% of the questions that DLD and DASNY has, so you guys don't even know about it. But then if there are other questions, we come to you. Once it gets past DLD, there's usually never any issues. So this project hasn't been approved yet, but I believe within the next 30 to 60 days it will be from DASNY, probably in the next 30 days. So once DASNY approves it, it goes back to the State Education Department Grants and Finance. They will issue an award letter. All right. Once you receive that award letter, then you can expect the 90% payment within 30 to 60 days. So you'll probably get 90% of the allocation or the awarded amount for last year's grant in the next 60 to 90 days is my guess. So if you need the cash to do something, then you know it's going to be a year later. If you're getting estimates now and you know you're going to do something later, it's okay to have an escalation clause of 10%, right? So if your contractor says, I can't give you a price for next year, give me a price for this year and your best guesstimate of what's going to happen next year. And the Division of Library Development will accept a 10% escalation clause. Okay. So let's talk about this now. We're expecting a lot of products to be amended, right? The cost of lumber went up 68%. It's come down now, but the cost of microchips have gone up. And so now it's getting harder to get generators and things of that nature. So the cost that you may have put into any of those 3 years of projects that we've talked about could have substantially changed. And so as a result, we're expecting a wave of amendments to projects, right? And it's going to be because of the materials and labor. Now, if you're amending a project and you have to add some work to do it, you have to get an approval before that work is done. And there's an amendment form, and this link goes to the RCLS LibGuide for construction. And there is a sample amendment form that is posted there from Division of Library Development. It's a pretty simple form. It's only one and a half page, but essentially you have to do some of the same stuff. You have to provide contractor estimates and other things. You have to re-amend the form. Now, something to keep in mind is because almost everybody got full funding, the total cost of your project cannot go down. So if you said you were going to spend $250,000, then you need to spend $250,000 because you got full funding and you can't give money back, right? DASNY has bonded for all of this money, and after everything is approved, you can't give the money back. So you have to spend it. And the other thing is closing a construction project has gotten more difficult as the years have gone on. And I think it's probably more difficult than ever. DLD is really paying attention to what you asked for, what you've purchased, and what you're reporting. So there is on the LibGuide a frequently asked questions. It's probably about 11 pages, but it goes through a lot of the information. So if you have a complicated project that you're closing out or you haven't done it before, this is a very good read.
Stephen, you have a question.
Sure.
Mary Page wants to know, where does an escalation clause need to be in your bid document?
No, because you are not uploading bid documents. So the escalation clause would be in your contractor's estimate. You could write that into your bid document, yes, if you're doing it, but it has to be in the contractor's estimate because that's what you're uploading as to the grant application.
You have another question coming in from Rhonda. Can you close a project before it's approved?
No, you may not. So you cannot close last year's projects yet. You have to wait till you get the award letter. Once you get the award letter, then you can close it. That's a good question.
And then she said, how do you know a project has closed?
So when you go through the closing process, you have to submit everything online, the budget, final budgets that you've spent, final expenses, certificate of occupancy has to be uploaded if it's required, and pictures, right? The pictures are really where they're spending a lot of their attention and time. So once all that happens, you'll get an email saying they approve it, and then you print the FS25 forms. Once you print those, sign them in blue ink and mail them up, you should get the final 10% within 30, 40, 60 days. So once you send those FS10 forms, that's how you know your project has been approved for completion by Division of Library Development. So good questions. So let's continue talking about amending the project because this is a scenario that I expect to happen, and this is a real life scenario that has happened. So library applied for an HVAC system and a circulation area rebuild, and I'm making up these numbers for easy, for $250,000, right? This was 2 years ago a bid, or the application was put in. And so 7 months later, they're doing the bid, and the HVAC alone came in at $300,000, and the circulation test is the same. Now, what are your options? We have 3 options. Just complete the project at the higher cost, and you report it in your final expenses that you just paid $100,000 more, right? So you have the money and you're just doing it because you have to. Let's say you don't have the money. So now you need to reduce the scope of your project. So maybe you remove the circulation area because you have to have your HVAC system. So then you can remove the circulation area from that grant and just do 300,000, right? Because you're still at the total of 250, can't go under. In this scenario, if you remove the circulation area, you can then apply for it again in the next cycle. So if you can hold off, right? But it has to be removed before you can apply for it again. You can't apply for it and then remove it. It can't be on 2 applications. And then the final thing is oh yeah, apply for it next year. So you can also maybe amend the scope. Maybe your HVAC system has 4 different compressors and air handlers, and you decide one of them can wait. So there are ways to do all of that. So this is how you would amend that project to bring it down, because if you can't do any portion of it. Does that make sense? So this is simplified. This is a simple one. Sometimes they get very complicated. Now let's talk about if you go under budget. That's going over budget. So if you go under budget, so here a library applied to construct a storage closet for $9,000. And let's say the actual cost came in at $8,500. Now you might be thinking, woohoo, we saved money. What's the problem? The problem is you got funded 50%, right? So you have to spend the $9,000. So you're under $500 now you have a couple options. You can amend the scope of the project and add custom shelving, which is what this library did. So they added custom shelving. They'll do an amendment and they'll add to their project rather than take away from their project. You can also amend the project to it because it's such a small amount. What DLD does sometimes is, hold on one second. What DLD will do sometimes is say, look in your operating budget. Maybe you did something that can be considered construction that we can say amend the project for that. So there is no passcode. So I don't know.
Can't get in.
Hold on one second. I'm going to resend this email. There's 2 people who can't get in.
Can we send it?
Send it to Jill. And is it Matt at Middletown? Who's Middletown? Matt?
Maybe. Yeah. All right.
No, it's me.
Thank you. Sorry.
Sorry, I want people, because this is a mandatory workshop, so I want to make sure people have access to it. Okay. Okay, so your project comes in under, you got full funding, so you have to spend the money. So now you got to add something to it. You have to amend the project, add something. And like I said, sometimes you can look into your operating budget. Maybe you replaced a window or a door, and well, that's kind of construction. So you can just tack it onto here and satisfy the requirement. Another option is just pay the guy $9,000. Invoice me for $9,000. Let's be done with it. Right? This is a small amount, so it's okay. But as these amounts get bigger, then that becomes a different scenario. So again, I expect there to be amendments because prices are changing. If you need help, contact me. I will send you the blank amendment form. And if it's a simple thing, you can just go ahead and do it. If it's more complex, then I can coach you through the best scenario or process for you. Okay, so let's look forward just a wee bit. I don't know if anybody's heard this, but there's a $5 billion bill out there to modernize and construct library facilities in underserved, marginalized communities. Right? If $5 billion, out of that $5 billion, it's expected $200 million will go to New York State. So if $34 million gets RCLS 1.4 million, how much do you think $200 million will get us? $6 million, something like that, right? Let me say this again. There's a potential for $6 million or more next year. However, this bill has to pass, and it hasn't, and it's not looking good, actually, according to ALA, Director of Government Relations. In fact, just yesterday, they sent out another advocacy email. So here's a link to the ALA website where you can see all this information, and also you can advocate for this. So if you want the money, then click on the link and make a few clicks and tell your Senator Schumer, I think it is, that we have to advocate to, because I believe this is up for discussion and passing right now. This is on the table. So, but however, $6 million, we don't know how that's going to look. We've heard that it'll come through the construction program, but maybe this isn't going to be $6 million, or maybe the state is going to take, 30% off the top, like they do on other things, which is fine. Also, this could go over a couple years. Maybe it's not all next year. And it's also probably more than just construction. It's also new services and things of that nature. So, but I would keep an eye on this. And if you see that this passes, then you should be making plans. Don't wait. So if this passes, start making plans now, so you are shovel ready for next year.
Stephen, Peggy has a question. It
Sure.
sounds like we can apply for a project using one estimate, and then after the award, seek more estimates. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. You do not have to have signed contracts, right? So, but the cautionary tale is that's what gets you in trouble. Because if you haven't gone out to bid and you just run out to your local guy to get an estimate, we've seen this time and time again, that then when you go out to bid and you scope your job with more thought and detail, it doubles or triples. So I can probably give you about 8 examples of that in the last 4 years. So yes, you can use anything, but it really is the planning process. It's got to do a lot of planning beforehand, especially the bigger and more complex the job. So let's talk about New York State bills. There are 2 bills that are pending, and I believe they both have passed the House and the Assembly, and are on the governor's desk. I believe, I'm not sure, but they're very close. And their bill number 1 would increase the time frame from 3 years to 4 years. Right? So that would be nice. It would give you an extra year to do it. And then the second bill would increase the amount available to fund the people at 90%. Right now, only 10% of the $1.4 million can go and fund a project at 90%. They're proposing that half of the funds could be used to fund projects at 90%. We're not expecting any projects to be funded at 90% for the next couple of years because the New City Library is doing a major construction program. And they're going to come in with some big applications for the next few years. And so nobody will get funded 90% until everybody got their 50% or 75%. So that's probably not going to happen. It won't affect us. It's likely these will pass, but until they pass, everything that we're talking about with the construction grant program is 3 years, right? So if we get the 4 years, that'll be a bonus that we'll learn later. So let's talk about the years. We've reviewed this before, but this is probably one of the most important slides where you can see everything at a snapshot about the whole program, right? So any cost, and we're going to review it real quick, any cost from January 1st to June 30th can be spent, but it has to be identified as library matching funds. And what type of expenses? Usually we would see engineering and architectural fees, right? Because that's when you're planning. So in thinking about next year, if you're doing a grant, start at January 1st with your architects and engineers so you can make sure to include those costs. Then the project cannot be completed September by time the application is due. You can complete your project in October, and that's fine. And it'll just be a year later for get the approvals and then get the funding, 90%, and then close it right out. You will get a award letter around June. Well, typically where things have slowed down, right? So it'll be August that the award letter will go out, and then the initial payments. And then by December of next year, so more than a year and 3 months after you submit the application, you have to have started the project. But that's pretty simple. If you've worked with an architect or engineer, you started your project, you're planning it. So everybody, to my knowledge, will have started the project because you've gotten an estimate for the application, so that there's no person who has not started the project. Then, because it's a 3-year, it's actually a 2-year program with 1-year extension. So if you haven't closed out your project by June of 2023, you must say, yes, my project is going on, and can I have a 1-year extension? And you will automatically get it. Then for this grant application, we're talking, you have to have the project done by June of 2024 and the closing paperwork. But again, don't wait on your paperwork. There's so many things going on. DLD, sometimes it's pretty slow in closing these out. I've heard it taking a couple of months to close out a project. The more difficult it is. So this is the overview of the time frame.
I have 2 questions. When is the application due to RCLS exactly?
September 1st, end of business day.
Okay, and Laura I have multiple projects that are unrelated. 1, buy the building behind the library, and 2, renovate our community room, priority. 3, install a walkway. Can I submit all 3, or does that muddy the waters?
No, you can submit all 3 projects. one project per building. So if the buildings aren't connected, then it would be two projects. But this was Finkelstein who asked that, then it will be one application.
Blauvelt.
Oh, Blauvelt. Blauvelt doesn't have a second location, I think. So yes, it will be one application. So you can do that. You can do windows, you can do a parking lot, and you can do a circ renovation. And as long as they're all construction, that's fine. You can do that. So what some libraries will do is I'm doing a parking lot renovation, but I really need to replace my back door. And that by itself is only a $600, $750 project. Well, tack it on, right? Because you couldn't do it by itself. It's still construction. So tack it on if you need to. So it's a way of getting these little things done because you're already doing a bigger project and it doesn't have to relate to that.
Is
But it has
buying
to be construction by itself.
a building considered construction?
Buying a building qualifies for the program. Talk to me about it. There's a lot of planning that needs to go into it. How you buy it, how it's structured, the finance, things of that nature.
Okay.
And when it happens is very particular. So, but yes, it absolutely can be done. As well as demolishing a building is
Yes.
qualifies as a construction plan.
Okay.
I have another question.
Mhm.
Jessica from Nanuet. In Nanuet, we don't expect to break ground on our building renovation until summer 2023. Should I wait until 2023 to submit our application?
I think with you, it depends on your bond. If your bond doesn't pass, are you going forward with that project, right? If the answer is yes, then you could apply for it this year. If the answer is no, then don't do it. So I think
Mhm.
you have to
Yeah,
apply for a
our
project
bond,
you know you're going to do, regardless of what happens with it,
right,
right? So that's your
bond is not going to the voters until spring of 22.
right.
And if we don't get it, we won't have enough money to do the whole project, so.
Right.
We think the bond vote will be May of 22, so we won't know until then whether we're definitely.
But if there's something that's outside of that you would do with the existing site, that you would do regardless of whether you're doing the building.
Right, like a
So,
separate,
yeah, that you
like a separate parking lot project or something.
or drainage that would happen anyways, or something to mitigate the stream going under the building, or something that you would do anyways. That would be a course of action.
Okay, and do that in 22 or this year?
Again, if you have the project well planned out and you can actually get a bid in the next 30 days and put it together, you have SHPO approval for that. Do you need state education or SED permit if the school district owns your building? Usually that happens when you bond. So you may not need a state education department permit now, but once you bond, the school district takes title of the property. Now that means you need an SED permit. So that is a big course of action for you. Let's talk a little bit later and identify it, okay, for you specifically.
A question from Chris from Finkelstein.
Huh?
Are you saying to submit different project numbers in the same year for like building, roof, and parking lot?
You can only submit one application. Within that one application, you can have projects, different projects, the parking lot, the roof, and windows. So one application per building. The only people who have two buildings, to my knowledge, would be like Western Sullivan, where they have 3 branches, Haverstraw, where they have a branch. So if you have a branch, usually that's the separate building. Okay. So I just want to touch base on why this workshop is mandatory, because I've got like 4 or 5 requests to say that they can't make it and things. And so really this is a board resolution, RCL's board resolution, and they reaffirmed this resolution in June. So I do not have the authority to override the RCLS board, so I cannot provide waivers. However, I kind of agree that there are instances in which it's reasonable. There's a library who has submitted a construction grant for the past 6 years, and they do an awesome job at it. This shouldn't be mandatory for that person. So, and perhaps maybe, viewing this and recording could suffice as well. So I'll go to the board next year and see if we can't make this less black and white and a little more wiggle room for some people. However, if this is your first year applying, no, you have to come. This is mandatory. There's too much information. And again, the whole point is to share it with everybody who is applying it. So I don't have to tell 20 different people the same information. You also learn an awful lot by hearing other people's discussions on this as well. And there's a lot of information that gets covered that triggers people's memories or different courses of action based on something else. This is also not a unique requirement. There are 6 other systems that have the same requirements as well. There's just simply too much money at stake and information to not do this. And when you're asking for $100,000 or something like that, yeah, you gotta put in a good effort. So that's why this is mandatory.
You have another question from Mary Page.
Mhm.
We have a door without access from the outside is not keyed. Keying that door, making it functional as an entry, that is not now. Can we tack that on?
No, I don't see that as being construction. How is that construction? That's a maintenance or a repair thing. So, and again, by the cost of that, what does that cost? $250? And that's not construction. Construction.
It's actually, it was pretty expensive because he had to, I think it was over $1,000, believe it or not, but.
I don't see that as
Okay.
construction.
That's why I was asking. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so let's do some quick reminders. So a reminder of how much money we have, $1,437,019. I expect the RCLS project to come in around, I don't know, 250,000. So we'll be getting half of that as well. So another reminder, architects and engineering fees are eligible. That happened a couple of years ago. So, but only from January 1st on. So include those. For those libraries who have school district owns their building, getting a Office of Facilities Planning permit submitted with the application continues and will always be your first path, right? Because for those libraries, it takes probably a few months to get a permit from SED. And that's if you don't go back and forth. So, and if you're doing it, submitting a permit, your project almost always needs an architecture engineer anyways. So, unless of course, the project's under $10,000. For a school district library where the school district owns the building, you can submit a project for $9,999 and not need an SED permit. And they'll also sometimes say you don't need a permit because you're doing something simple like relamping the building. And maybe that's more than $9,000. Next, DUNS number. If you have a DUNS number, it must be registered with the federal SAM system. So this is becoming more and more prevalent. So if you have a DUNS number, go through the process and register with the federal SAM system, not the state, and don't pay a third party to register for you. This is something you can do on your own. It just takes a little effort. And I believe if the system has been allowed to lapse, that you have to send in a certified letter, possibly. So it could take 30 days or so. And where this hits the road is on the payee information. It asks about that. So, and what we're going to look is in the SEDRIF database. If there's a DUNS number in there, you'll be required to do this. If you don't have a DUNS number or a SAM, don't go and get one yet, because it's just something to maintain. Any federal funds will require this. So if this Rebuild Libraries America's Act passes, then everybody will need to do this to access federal funds, but don't do it until you need to.
I have a question, Stephen. Can you please repeat the information about the school district library for $9,999? Thank you.
Sure. So this is only for school district libraries where the school district owns the building. right? If the school district owns a building, and they almost always own the building because they've issued a bond, right? And so either the bond is still outstanding or title didn't revert back to the library after the bond. In that scenario, the school district owns the building, and so therefore it falls under the state education department and the facilities planning. So if your project is over $10,000, you need that permit. If it's under 10,000, you do not. Now, libraries like Cornwall, they did a master plan, and they probably spent a while, maybe a year or so, developing several projects, and then got the permits for all of those projects, and then over several years applied through the construction program. So if you get ahead of the game, you can get that out of the way. And this probably affects 5 or 6 libraries, I think. Okay, more reminders. So this came up a couple years ago. Any asbestos and mold remediation do not qualify as a standalone project. We use this terminology, standalone projects. Does everybody understand what that means? I think there was a little confusion. What it means is that's the only project you're applying for. I'm applying for mold remediation. So that means standalone project, it doesn't stand up by itself. Now, if you're demolishing an area and there's mold in there, then it can be included, but it can't be by itself. And if you do any asbestos or mold, then it's matching funds only. And don't forget the air monitoring and test cost as well. All those little tests ahead of time and stuff. If you know about this and you've done testing, throw that all into your application. Another little trick, this came up probably 2 years ago. If you're applying for a closed circuit TV system, your vendor, right, must break out the software cost. And that software cost then has to be paid for by matching funds. So if you're doing if you're just replacing cameras, that's fine. You're not doing the recording device. But if you're replacing that piece of hardware that records it, you must get your vendor to break out the cost of the software and then say it's matching funds. So that's has to be done. Some other things, words, some magic words, right? Nowhere in your narrative or the contractor's estimates can there be the word repair, maintenance, or patch. You will be asked to change it, right? Instead, use the words restore, renovate, rehabilitate, or refurbish. And these are DASNY things, right? Because none of the words repair, maintenance, or patch qualify for capital improvements. So just by changing those words. So just be conscious of that, because you will be asked to change them if they show up. All right, so here's some follow-up stuff from the April workshop. All right, we talked about fences. We weren't sure if some fences, specifically Goshen had a really good question, right? Because they have an old fence that they were going to restore and maybe add to it and stuff. And so the question is, would the fence qualify as a standalone project? And the answer is no, not as a standalone project. However, if you're doing a generator and there's a fence around the generator, then you can include the fence. Or let's say you're doing a whole bunch of retaining walls and stuff and you need a fence because there's more than a 4-foot drop or something, then the fence would qualify. But just a fencing project by itself does not qualify. Think of it like furniture and equipment, only within the context of a project, a larger project. And now car charging stations, this also came up last time, and it's the exact same scenario. By itself, it does not qualify. However, if you're repaving or you're installing solar panels or you do something related, then a car charging station would qualify. And also, I just received an email 2 days ago that through Charge Ready New York, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research Development Agency, right? If you're doing a big project, you absolutely get these people in. There's lots of rebates for LED lighting, for daylight harvesting, for geothermal, or anything of that nature. Anyways, there's another program for public parking lots that you could get a rebate of $4,000 per charging port. It could also be for employee parking lots, and there's also some other things. So you can click on that link and that'll take you to the NYSERDA website if you want to look into that further. Also, almost every utility company I know would have incentives for charging stations. Anything you do with electrical, LED upgrades or whatever, you should always be looking at your utility company to see what incentives they're going to provide as well. Okay, so we always suggest the board resolution, and this from here on is the language specifically on the DLD assurance form that your board president is signing, which says what your board has approved. So that's that same language plus the RCLS assurance. So this is a recommendation. Also up on the RCLS LibGuide, there's two PDFs that are up there, right? And I put that up about a month ago because this is what your board has to sign. Two documents. It's the DLD assurance and the RCLS assurance document. So those PDFs are on the construction LibGuide for you to download for your board packages and reports. And when it comes to those, it says September 1st, but we'll take it through September. I just need these board resolutions before it goes to the state. So if you don't have a board meeting in July and August, then September is fine. But no extensions after that. It goes to the state. So just a quick thing, because this is always get confusing as well. Yeah. Stop sharing the screen. Let me go ahead and share it. Okay, so there are 3 forms that get sent to RCLS. Everything else is either completed online or completed and uploaded as a PDF. So the 3 forms will be the FS10 forms, signed in blue, 1 copy of the payee and the W-9 form, again signed in blue, and then the RCLS assurance letter, signed by the board president with the minutes. So those 3 things need to be sent to me at RCLS. Everything else is online or uploaded. Doesn't create less paper because I print half the stuff you guys put up there anyways. See it. So here are some important links as well. This is the DLD general construction webpage, and they did some updates to that. A lot of the same information, but it has been organized a little differently. In 2020, DLD did the library construction aid webinar. So that's, if you don't have a lot of experience with this program, that's a good thing to view. SHPO, if you need SHPO approval, here's a link to the online application portal. And here's a link to the construction application portal. And here's a link to the RCLS LibGuide. Can you see that LibGuide, or are you still looking at the PDF? Okay.
So your slide.
Just slides down. So that's it. And then here's my contact information. Now, just be aware, as we do every year, I won't be available from August 9th to August 13th. That is the 46th annual Hofer family camping trip. So we've been doing this for 46 years. There's about 177 of us that goes, and I've never missed a year. So for that week, I'm not available, and there's really not a substitute or somebody who can step in with to help you. So either get to me before then or after then, please. And in email, you can email it, and then I'll once I get back, I'll respond to you as well if you have questions. Okay, any questions about the presentation? If not, slide into some handouts. First thing I want to see.
That was August 9th to the 13th or,
Yeah, second whole week in August,
okay,
9 through 13.
thank you.
Yep. So this is the LIB guide, the construction aid LIB guide. So here's the April 29th slides. Here's the slides for today. Next, we'll review the online application documents and upload it. Here's that DLD assurance, the RCLS assurance. And I'm just going to hit on these things real quick while we're here. So when we go into the application and your building is over 50 years or more, then you need a SHPO approval unless you qualify for an exemption. And if you qualify for that exemption, you have to copy and paste that into the, I think when I open this, you're not gonna be able to see it. Can you see that? Or are you still looking at the website, LibGuide?
LibGuide.
LibGuide, okay. I'm not sure how to do that then. Hold on, I'm gonna stop sharing. I think I can share screen too instead of. No. No. So anyways, you can click on these two things yourself and you can see those things. So next I'm gonna go ahead and open up these handouts. And then I will share that.
Even quick question for you about SHPO.
Sure. This over here.
Hold on, I lost the chat.
I can tell them what it is.
Okay, thanks.
If part of our historic building is not historic, it was added, later, does that mean that I have to apply for an exemption in that case?
Yes, so the initial construction of your building is defined by when was the library built? Your annual report question 9.23. Right? So, and what that is the initial construction. So if your library was a barn in 1820 and then got renovated and add on, the initial construction is 1820. So it's always the oldest date of the structure.
Even though the part that's being renovated is not,
Doesn't
Okay.
matter. That applies to the entire building. So, but you'll get the SHPO approval, I'm sure. So here's handout one, the online application. All this stuff is just pre-formatted for you. So then we come to, and this is all filled out online. And one of the things to note is once you do the application, it's 4 or 5 pages, do the whole thing, right? Because you will not be able to save unless all the fields are completed. The application should be the first thing you do as well, because you won't be able to do other certain things without the application. So do the complete application there. The building name will be your library, obviously. And then all this stuff is really pretty self-evident, but this is what all of these answers will be checked against by the Division of Library Development, which is your annual report. So if you go to the annual report and you look at these questions, that's the answer. So if you don't know who owns the building, go to your annual report, and that's where we'll be looking for that. And one of the great things about this, if you've done a construction application before, you've got 90% of your answers here. They're not going to change, right? So if you've done a construction application before, I would look at what was approved, because there are many changes after you submit it, either by myself or Division of Library Development. So look at the approved and copy those answers. This is where you have to cut and copy the language. So this is why I posted that SHPO exemption language. And what you're going to use it for are, let's say you're installing a closed circuit TV system, right? As long as you're not making holes more than 6 inches between walls or disturbing architectural moldings, then you don't need SHPO approval. So you go and you find that language in there, you copy, not the whole Appendix A, whatever applies to you. A lot of them, like HVAC systems, you know, if you're just replacing your HVAC systems, that's almost always a good exemption. So look through that, but the exemption has to apply for the entire project. So if the exemption fits on the HVAC portion, but you're replacing some windows and there's no exemption, then you have to go to SHPO for your entire project. The exemption has to be for everything. There might be 2 or 3 exemptions. So maybe there is the exemption for the HVAC and there's the exemption for the closed circuit TV system. So you'll have copy 2 exemptions in there because there's 2 aspects of your project. That makes sense? Okay. So going down, just complete this. Your project title, just keep it simple. There's a new box to check this year. If it's a broadband project, you can check that box, broadband qualifies. So here, if you're not doing a simple project like RCLS, we're doing one project, the parking lot rehabilitation. So my total project cost is going to be the same as the project which I'm funding for, and I'm asking for 50%. But if you're doing a multi-year project, Liberty did one, actually they're finished. Inwood Lake has done this, you know, Nanuet certainly would do this, and New City at the beginning of this. They're going to have many projects within the big one. So they're at New City, their big project may be $13 million, but out of that, they're going to ask for $1 million this time, and then ask for 50% of it. So that's the way that goes. Some of this stuff won't be filled in until you do your budget. Right? I'm not sure which cost. I think maybe it's this one. One of these costs, when you do your budget, it'll populate this. Next thing is the time frame. Right? So your project is expected to start on or before. Right? It should be after July 1st for most projects. And then it can be no later than July 24th. Keep in mind, dates are in 2 different areas, 2 or 3. The dates have to match. I've seen sometimes where you say you're going to start a project here, but in the timetable narrative, you're starting at 6 months later. So just make sure those dates match. And that's the application. And then what happens is you go through and there's a checklist. And the next thing is the funding sources. So almost everybody has library operational funds or capital funds. Don't select state education department. Then you will put in what are the documentation, just the name of the bank, and then you enter the amount that is in that documentation. And New City, we'll talk about this because your numbers are really big. So we'll talk about what goes in there. Everybody else shouldn't have a problem with that. The thing to keep in mind is you have to upload that bank statement. We only want the first page that includes your name and account number and balance. We don't need all 27 pages extension. In fact, you can even cross out your account number except for the last 4 if you want as well. So your banking information isn't around. But one page. Next thing you come down to is the narratives. And this is where a lot of time is spent. Right? There's 5 separate narratives. The project S, abstract, description, the impact, the timetable, and the budget narratives. So the first thing to learn is do not put your library name in here, right? Because we know your library name, and when this system prints stuff for legislators and everything else, it'll already print your name right above this. So don't put your name in there. And this abstract, this is what gets published. This is what all the legislators sees. This is what goes into the newspapers. So this is your title for the front page of the Times. Right? The next narrative is the project description. So now, let's say you have a big project where you have multi-years. I'll use New City again. They may have one sentence saying that, you know, we have a $13 million project, and within that project, we're applying for this, foundations and demolition or something. Now, what you need to do, so that's the only thing you need to do when you talk about a larger project, is just mention it. And then what you have to do is clearly talk about the project that you're applying for. And again, most people, when you're writing grants and that, you're talking about programs and outcomes. Here, we're talking about construction activity. So this is my pointer. So we're talking about construction activities. So this is an example of what we get sometimes. And they're talking about a computer room, and it's going to add 10 computers and will help for homework and job searches and everything else. But that's not what the money's buying. What the money is buying and paying for is to erect new walls, to, provide electrical wiring for 15 outlets and network connections and a drop ceiling and light fixtures, right? So you have to talk construction. And one of the ways you can do this is you can describe from your contractor's estimates. So a lot of times you can pick up the language from there. Now remember, this has to be a narrative. We're not bullet pointing. There can be bullets in here, but the whole thing doesn't need bullet. And don't copy your contractor's estimate and put it into here exactly as it is in your contractor. So I've seen that happen before. So it needs to be a little bit of a narrative of what we're doing as well. And this is probably where we spend a lot of time.
Stephen, what happens if the project doesn't start or end on the date that you thought it would?
That's not a problem as long as it can be completed within the time frame of the entire cycle of June 2024. So I've never seen them come back and hold anybody to any of these dates in the timetable, which is next actually, right? So again, remember, do not use the words repair, maintenance, or patch in any of these narratives, right? Restore, renovate, rehabilitate, refurbish. So actually the next narrative is the impact of the project. Now keep in mind, you only need to address one impact, but if it does address more, then go ahead and address it. And this is really what I need you to do, is because many times we can't figure out which impact you're speaking about or somebody's speaking about. So we want to make the statement. This project will increase library efficiency, which is one of by increasing capacity by doing this, right? So make sure you regurgitate which priority or impact that you're speaking about, and then speak about it. So, and again, you only need to meet one of them, so don't force your way into the others. Next narrative is the timetable, right? So the timetable must be, well, it can be beyond this, right? Your timetable could start last year with planning or January. I wouldn't go beyond January 1st, right? So if you've done anything with engineers, architects, you could include that in here. But really, you're speaking about the project that you're applying for. So again, for New City, their project is going to go over 3 years or 2.5 years or something like that. So they're going to speak only within the time frame about the foundations and demolition, that aspect of it. Right? And again, the dates must match. Must match what we put into the application as your start date and the end date. And the other thing is, you can do it by quarter if you think this is going to go over, but make sure there's some dates in there, because we've seen some libraries put in, we're going to start here and finish there, and there's nothing in between for 1.5 years. So there has to be some detail. Then the final one is the narrative, is the budget narrative. And your budget narrative should match the budget entries that you do. And essentially, for each contractor quote you have, or an architect or engineer, that will be what you would say. So for RCLS, I might have $10,000 for engineer service, $210,000 for the contractor, Hofer paving and excavating, And then I'm also going to put in, because we might do a portion that goes onto the state highway. And so we need a New York State DOT permit. And that's going to cost $750. So I'm going to put that cost in there because I know it's there as well. And then total it up. Make sure you're only using whole dollars everywhere in the application, no pennies anywhere. And also, if you have a SAM or an Economic Development Assistant Program grant or any other grants or fundings that you're going to use, this is where the explanation comes in.
Even question?
Sure.
Do we need to use the entire sentence of the impact statement?
No, just as long as we know which one you're speaking to, right? Increase effectiveness of library service, say that, and you're going to do it by something, or increase efficient utilization of the building, and then talk about it. So as long as it's clearly identified which one you're speaking of. So that's the timetable and the budget narratives. So you're going to do each vendor, and as a format thing, I like the dollar amount first, you know, $10,000, and then explain. It's the architect's fee for the parking lot, you know, $200,000, and then explain. So all your numbers line up nicely on the side of the sheet, and then you total it. And then these numbers have to match exactly into this, which is your budget forms. So you have to enter your project budget amounts. 95% of all of your costs are going to be purchase services. Code 40. Purchase services, there are only two types of purchase services. Consultants, which are going to be your architects, engineers, interior designer, something like that, or contracted services, right? Which goes here, your type of service. There's only one of two answers, contracted or consultant. And that's going to be all your contractors. So for every estimate you have, you need one record. So here you have the contracted, it's going to be Hofer paving or electrical, and then they're going to be doing the electrician. Keep your description short, right? Electrician, general contractor, paver, architect, something like that. It doesn't need to be long. So for every estimate you have, there'll be one of these records. So now let's talk about furniture, right? Because sometimes furniture could be considered supplies and materials. And let's go over this when it does and when it doesn't. If you purchase a desk and chairs from Brodart, and your custodian or your library employee installs that, unwraps it, puts it together, and puts it into place, that is supplies and materials. If you go to Creative Library Concept and you buy the same tables, furnitures, and chair, and the Creative Library Concept people deliver it and put it in place, then it's a contracted service, right? So only if your staff is doing it would it be supplies. If you hired a contractor or consultant, then it belongs on this code instead. Now, when you're talking about supplies and materials, right, this is where DLD is getting particular about closing grants out. And so the advice as of a few years ago is try not to identify, we're going to have 6 chairs and they're going to be this type and it's going to cost exactly this much. Instead, if we can group this stuff together, it's accent furniture, it's shelving, tables, seating, and for the children's room, right? So if you can try and group these things together, then it will help you with closing your grant out. Because almost always what we see happening when it comes specifically to furniture and equipment is it's not thought out. You haven't actually specified the color, the brand, the type. Maybe there's just a budget of $250 per chair, but then it comes in at much more or much less. So no matter what, this needs a little wiggle room. And if you're doing a lot of equipment and furniture, talk to me and I'll help you through this. So it's not painful when you close out your grant, because you tell them you're buying exactly 6 chairs in this type, and you don't do that at the end, then you're gonna have to amend your grant. So equipment must have a useful life of at least 6 years to be eligible for this. And then equipment, only equipment over $5,000 in the library installs. I've only seen this code used once, so I don't expect really anybody to use this. Maybe if you bought a generator from somebody on Long Island and you're paying somebody in Orange County to install it, well, the generator could be just a purchase of equipment, but why would you do that? So I don't expect many there.
And you have a couple questions.
Sure. Yeah, this,
Um, Maria says, is landscaping ever included in qualifying expenses?
only as part of a larger project. So you're installing a gas main, or you're installing a generator. And because you have to now trench through your lawn and some hedges and a flower bed. So because you had to destroy those flower beds and hedges, to restore them qualifies, right? However, if you just want to do some landscaping and a fence and things, that does not qualify. Landscaping as a standalone project will never qualify. However, there are things like, there are a couple libraries who have done site improvements where they have a hill that they have made into tiers and then made a stage with a sound system and lighting and electrical. Well, now that's not really landscaping, that's site development, and they've made a theater outside with that. That qualifies. But landscaping as a general rule does not qualify, no.
Okay, Jessica has a question. I'm closing out a grant this year, and they're asking for a lot of photographs of very specific elements of the elevator and restroom projects. Is this where they get the list of things they want photos of?
Yes. Yes. So they're getting a list of things they want photos from your narrative. And also you have to provide photos ahead of time. And we'll talk about that later. That's one of the slides. So, any more questions? So we're done with this one. Last thing, last year, they added somebody from the system has to be a contact person. So I'll fill this out on all the applications. That just puts me, and that allows me to get the emails that you get about, the extensions and have you started your project and stuff like that. Okay, so
Another
that,
question, Stephen.
Yep.
I lost it. Mary Page, we are constructing a new room, an enclosed new teen space where there is now an atrium. Is that considered new construction? It's inside the existing building for the question on the application, or is it a renovation?
that's a renovation. New construction is new building. So that would be a renovation, right? And it's construction because you're closing something. So you're building walls, and in those walls, you're gonna probably put outlets and network wiring. And now that you could close the space, it probably affects your HVAC system and maybe your fire alarm or something of that nature. So yes, that's clearly construction. Mhm. I need to open my next handout. This one is a little easier. Let me share my screen. Okay, so this is documents that get sent to RCLS. And in total, there are 7. So first one is this FS10 form. Now, again, you won't be able to print this FS10 form until you complete your application and the budgets, right? And then it'll populate things. The big thing about this is it's blank. Even though you put in a budget for purchase services or any materials, all of this will be $0 and everything will be blank. So you have to sign 3 blank forms. Don't print these back to back. They must be single-sided because of the way Division of Library Development does their paperwork. Right, and a reminder, it's 3 copies, and there's a couple forms that have to be signed in blue ink, and this is one of them. So all 3 get physically sent to me. Now remember this, almost probably 50% of people every year miss this. Print, it should say print, name and title of officer here. So, you don't know who's signing this usually by the signature. So, and of course, the library director is the chief administrative officer, right? So the board president signs the DLD assurance and the RCLS assurance, and the director signs everything else. So that will be printed. This you'll print, and despite it tells you you don't need this, but they do. They need a W-9 as well. So this is the payee form, right? This is the library's name, your name and email. Can't use the municipality. Everybody should know their vendor record except for maybe Newburgh. If you don't know it, let me know. This is where we're talking about the SAM and the DUNS number. So if you, doesn't show it here, but yes, it does. So you have to put in here, if you have a DUNS number, you have to have the SAM, and this is where. So if you haven't renewed your SAM registration by September 1st, or I'm sorry, it's not renewed and active, you have to tell me the date that it was renewed and put in there. And Division of the Library Development is following up on these things as well. So that's usually the only issue here. And then everybody is a non-for-profit, everybody is non-secretariat, and everybody is chartered by regions. And this is another one, blue ink. So the library director signs this one, blue ink. 2 pages, single-sided. This is the substitute W-4 form that was new in 2019. And make sure you're downloading these forms from the website. Don't go out and use the IRS W-9 form. Don't use this form, right? Because this form is different. This form is for this grant program. So, don't use one from the school district. Download the forms from the site because they're for this program. So the W-9 is really simple. You can check and put either your 501c3, a school district library, special district library, or municipal library. So that's fine if you do that. I've never seen any issues with this. And of course, you're going to check that you're not subject to any backup withholding. And then this is the last one that gets sent to RCLS. And this is the RCLS assurance. So what the whole point of this is, we're asking your board to assure that you're committed to completing the project applied for as submitted. Of course, we expect amendments to these projects, right? Especially in this time. So it's, if you don't do the project at all, or you fail to do the project after 3 years, what'll happen is, in this language, is you become barred for applying for a project for 5 years. It's that much a problem if you don't do the project or complete the project. And to my knowledge, there hasn't been anybody who has reached that. So a couple have come close, but nobody has gotten there. And so you attach a copy of the minutes or draft minutes and send it with this. So those are the documents that get sent to RCLS. Are there any questions about those? Okay, I'll pull up the next one. So this will be the last document. Get there. These are the documents that you upload to the portal. So here's the first document. This is the Division of Library Development, their assurance form. And here I've checked, right? So you have to check all of these things. Right? And then if it's the acquisition, it would be this. And then either it's owned by the school district or the library owns it. And then if you have a SAM grant and you use it as matching funds for this program, you would have checked this box. Or if you have a SAM grant at all, period, for the library, you would check that box. And then every library has to affirm that we're not refinancing, we're not buying warranties, we're not doing repairs, painting, yada, yada, yada. So, and now when you upload your files as PDFs, everything should be a PDF. You shouldn't be uploading Word documents or anything, right? It should all be PDFs, and you should label those documents. So for a SHPO letter, it should be shpoletter.pdf is the file name. And then when we upload the file, you have to label it also. And if you don't label some files, then it won't allow you to submit the application. And this is one of them. So if you don't upload this document and label it correctly, and it's a drop-down menu and say SHPO DLD assurance, if you don't say this is DLD assurance, you won't be able to submit your application. Let's say your board hasn't approved it by September 1st. What I want you to do is just make a PDF and write in here, will approve on. So you've uploaded a document and you give me a date that we can expect it to be replaced with the current document. And that date has to be before October 1st. So for those of you that don't have a board meeting, that's the way we can get around that for a month. And this is going to be true of all the SHPO letters, contractor estimates. Make sure you label them, and it's not, you know, document A12698754721. Short
Even
environment. Oh,
excuse me, do
sure.
you want the photos in PDF form also, labeled in PDF?
Yes, it should be. Yes. So what a lot of people do will be doing it as a Word document and then saving it as a PDF.
What if you're exempt from SHPO approval?
Then that exemption language from should be included in the application. So the only in the application it says, is your building 50 years or older? If you select yes, then you either have to provide a SHPO letter or an exemption copied from there. I have seen once that SHPO has given a library, your library has no redeeming historical qualities, you're exempt from every review. So I've seen a library who has a letter from SHPO saying they're exempt from all reviews. So if you have a blanket letter, then you would upload that. And some libraries, you know, like I believe some libraries have gotten the SHPO letter for their entire project, so they're updating the same letter 3 years in a row. I think it was Greenwood Lake, maybe. Somebody did.
No, Stephen, we had the blanket letter and SHPO said that we couldn't use it. We had to get separate letters each year for each project.
Oh,
Even though we
did
had a blanket letter from 10 years ago or so.
Oh, that's a change then.
Pain in the ass.
Yeah, but the SHPO letter needs to speak to that project too. So that if you're doing, you know, a circuit renovation, then there should be no adverse impact due to the circuit renovation. But we're jumping ahead a little bit. Before that, we had the short environmental assessment form, right? So this is a form that it's a little more difficult. This can take a little bit of a process sometimes. If you go through I think it's Chris, is it? And you put in your information, it'll actually complete like 5, 6, 7 answers. And more importantly, it'll create the map that's required to go with this form as well. So if you go through that process, it'll create a PDF and then you can complete the other questions. So here, there's a brief description of the project, of the proposed action. You know, spend just a minute on this because you can copy that into like 3 other forms as well. You can use the same descriptions. It's also on some other form. Mostly what we see is people don't answer every single question. That's the biggest problem with this form. Every single question has to be answered, yes or no. And watch out for questions. Does this proposed action require a permit, right? Number two is if you answer yes, then the question says, if yes, list the agency. So watch out for questions like that, specifically this one. I think it's one or two other ones. If you answer, then you have to answer further, right? And this is another one, the acreage. A lot of people are not, it has to be answered. So what if you're doing a burglar alarm system or whatever? It doesn't matter. So there are online calculators where you can convert square footage into acres. So the total acreage of your library, the site to be physically disturbed, maybe it's 0, you know, because you're doing a closed circuit TV system and you're not disturbing anything really. Or maybe you're doing 10 by room and it's 0.005 acres that you're disturbing. And then the total acres. Don't leave this blank, you'll be asked, right? And the other thing is if you filled in these questions before last year, they check. So if you tell me, you know, last year you're in an urban aquatic area and this year you're in a parkland industrial, why? What's changed? So look at last year too, the approved documents, right? Especially with this, almost everything is going to be identical if you've done this before. There are 2 places you have to sign. Remember to sign both, right? And also on the websites, no matter how you do this, this is either 1, 2, or 3 different PDFs. You have to combine these into one PDF and upload one SHPO document. So that's another thing. And then the last thing, right? One document with 6 pages, not 3 documents. Probably 5 or 6 libraries were asked to update their map. This is the map that comes out of the program if you use it. It's okay if you don't use the program, right? And these are the questions that were answered for RCLS based on that program. If you don't use that program and answer it yourself, that's fine. You can use a Google map, you can use a tax map, but it has to be legible, right? So make sure that you can see the property and it's legible because you'll be asked. Make sure another thing is all the PDFs are orientated correctly. So, you know, don't give me 3 pages right side up and the next 3 are upside down. Again, you'll be asked to go back and fix that. So here we're talking about the pictures. And the pictures really have become super important because this is what they're doing with Division of Library Development and closing out a lot of the grants. So the recommendation is to do this in Word, make your pictures, make sure you identify the library pictures, maybe even put the project number in here. And then a picture with a simple of what we're doing. This is just a guideline, you know, 2 pics per page in a Word document, briefly describing, and then upload as a PDF, right? Don't give me dozens and dozens of pictures of the same thing unless it's specifically asked for. And let me give you an example of what Division of Libraries Development. So a library is replacing a closed circuit TV system, and they've got cameras, Finkelstein. They got cameras in 53 locations. Guess how many pictures they requested? 53 pictures of where every camera is going, whether it's there or not. So think about closing out the grants. Guess what they're going to want? 53 pictures of every location that matches the picture you just sent, right? So, which baffles me. I mean, I think that's way over the top, but it is what it is. So taking pictures is important. Another thing to consider when you're taking pictures for the completion is what if you're doing an oil tank in ground or something that's going to be covered up. Make sure you take a picture of it before it's covered up. Maybe you're doing lots of wiring in the walls and you have huge electrical budgets. Take a picture before the walls are closed up, because if you don't, they're going to ask for you to upload a detailed copy of the paid invoice which shows that work. And really what you want to do is upload a picture and not the invoice. because that might open up other issues depending on what's going on. So take progress pictures as you go, so you have them available. Any more questions on pictures? Okay. Here's a smart growth form. Here's another one. Make sure you download the form and you don't use the school district form because they're different. And you know, this is asking about a school district, so the district is the school district here, the library. You need to fill in these last 4 numbers. That'll come off your application. Almost every single project, you probably check this first box. To advance projects for the use, maintenance, or improvement of existing infrastructure. Okay? Unless you have something special, that's what you're doing. And remember that brief description we talked about? That same brief description can go here. So, and make sure you're only talking about the project for which you're asking funds for. Don't tell me about anything else. It's just the circulation area, then that's all we're talking about. And then here's another requirement. If you don't own the building and the municipality owns the building, you need a motion from the municipality that says they're aware of the project. The building will remain a library for at least 10 years from the date of completion. That's the key right there. They gotta state what the project is. This is the whole key. The building will remain a library for 10 years and that they approve it. Same thing for a landlord, right? If you are renting your building, then your lease could prove that it's building for 10 years, and then you need a letter from the landlord saying they're aware of the project and they agree to that project being done. School districts are exempt from this, where the school district owns the building. That's the exemption. You don't need school district approval for this. And it's unfortunate, there's like 2 or 3 libraries that the municipalities have for years blocked the library from applying for grants to fix their buildings. It's baffling. But it's politics.
Stephen,
Here's, sure, yep.
is the state ed form for non-school district libraries as well, meaning smart growth form?
Yes, yes. Yep, all the forms you'll write within the application, you can download the PDFs. The last thing, this is what an SED building permit looks like. So there are going to be a lot of projects that require building permits, but you don't need to submit the building permit with the application unless you're a school district library where the library owns or the school district owns the building. Then you have to submit this 12-page application or whatever it is with the September 1st. And that's a big deal. That's a hard lift for some libraries. And it used to be almost an 18-month period for them to review projects. And you could pay minimum of $6,000 to have your project move forward. But of course, then that $6,000, you can't apply for a grant for that. Let's see. And here's what the SHPO, State Office of Preservation Parks, looks like. So if your building is 50 years and older and you can't clearly identify a exemption from that agreement, then you need to get SHPO approval. And the SHPO approval, this is what we're looking for. The proposed, whatever your action is, your project will have no adverse impact. And I've seen these slam dunks. Here's the problems. Here's when you run into where SHPO is going to get involved. Is your building is 50 years old and you're replacing the windows or the front door, stuff that affects the outside. Right? In fact, I've had 2 libraries who had to pull out because they didn't leave enough time to go back and forth with SHPO about the windows. So anything inside, it's almost always a slam dunk. So, and the SHPO approval could take, assuming it's not a window project or anything, less than a week. You can get it usually within a few days. So So the other documents that need to be uploaded, are proof of available funds, bank statement, or a CD or something like that, and then the vendor contracts and estimates.
We have 2 questions. How much digging is equals ground disturbance?
If you dug to a level that has previously been undisturbed. So if you're going underneath your parking lot and you're going down a foot and that has already been disturbed, then you don't need approval. But if you're going down 4 foot and you haven't gone down that deep before, then you need SHPO approval. So it is undisturbed.
Okay, and Jessica's asking if we get SHPO approval for the overall renovation project, but we break out grant applications for smaller projects within the reno, will we need separate SHPO approvals for the smaller projects?
Well, I don't see why you would need SHPO approval on a new building because it's not 50 years or older. Okay, so I don't think SHPO will come into play unless you're doing something to your existing building that you're keeping. Right? So a new building wouldn't require SHPO approval. It's not 50 years old.
And would replacing a furnace need the approval from SHPO?
I bet you there's going to be an exemption that you'll be able to find in the language. As long as you're not putting 6-inch holes through new 6-inch holes and you're not putting new ductwork in the middle of, then you'll be able to get the exemption language for a boiler.
Jessica said it'll be a reno of the existing building.
If it's a renovation of the existing building, then yes, absolutely. And it's 50 years or older. So again, it depends on the project. If you're talking about just replacing the boiler, chances are you don't need SHPO approval, that the exemption will apply. But if you've already got SHPO approval for the whole renovation of the building, just provide the approval because you already have it. Okay, the last thing I want to do is just real quickly jump into the application, just to show it if anybody hasn't seen it. Are you seeing the login screen? Yes? Okay, good. This is the login screen. So if you haven't, you'll end up starting a new application, right? If you have, then your application already started one, it'll have a project number of 2022, right? And all your previous ones. So here is the application, and my suggestion is certainly do the first 3, at least the first, in order, right? Because you won't be able to do the FS10 form until you have the application, the project, and the project budgets, because the budgets fill into here. So, and all of these forms, like I said, when you click on it, you'll get the ability to click on the form you need. So, and the application, I mean, we've gone through this, so I'm not going to go through this again. Fill this out, but in navigating, you always want to go back to the construction checklist, and that'll always bring you back. When you're done with your application form, this is just an indication for you. That's all it is, that these things are done. So this is a way of, if you have a couple people working on different things, they can do that. We've gone over all this stuff. So I don't think I want to go into too much detail here. Right? Again, all these forms that you would need are all right here. And if you need information, it's just information. And then when you attach these things, this is where you attach forms, right? When you do the attachment, you browse your computer, you find it. I'm just going to grab a form here. Anything, first thing came up. And then this is where that short description of the file needs, right? If you don't have document uploaded that is labeled assurances, you will not be able to submit your application. Right? So all the forms that you upload, make sure you put it into here. And again, we're not required. We scooted that requirement, so that's not a problem. And I'm going to cancel this. And then I'm going to go back to the construction checklist. And the budget form. This is where, again, there's three things. And it's easy to add additional forms too. So make sure you delete any blank ones. Right? And then supplies, you just go there and add this way. This is where, again, the quantity, you might want to put 6 chairs at $250 from such and such, and then it'll do the cost. But that's gonna, unless you are buying those exact 6 chairs at that exact cost, it's gonna be a problem when you close. So maybe you want to do one quantity of 6 chairs, 3 tables, and something for the computer room at the unit cost of $3,500 from the vendor. So that's the recommendation there. Kind of group them together. I'm not sure what DLD is going to do with that, but that was the advice 2 years ago. But the more detail you get, then the more you have to adhere to that or amend it later. And it may be you have to amend it later, but you just haven't gotten to that level of decision making yet. And then everything else is there. So you save your progress. That's where you submit the applications. Right? I have exactly 1 month to review all the applications, and that's getting tough with the bigger numbers. So, in fact, our application is due about a month after Westchester and other library systems. They do everything much sooner. And then when you close out your report, right? When you do your final budgets, it's really just kind of the same thing. The encumbrance, the date of the check, the provider, who, and then the amounts. And the award funds have to match exactly to what you were awarded. And so there's a trick with that, because chances are you're not going to get a payment that matches that exactly. So you may have to take one payment. Let's say you're awarded $5,000 on a $10,000 project, and you paid the vendor one check for $10,000. You take that check, number 120, and you say $5,000 would be matching, and that $5,000 would be award. So you break apart one check to make sure your totals match here. And the other critical thing is, because you're closing this project out 2-3 years after you submitted the application, is the matching funds. If we said that the closed circuit TV, that you're going to pay the software with the matching funds, but then you have to actually do this 3 years later when you close out the grant. So when you close out the grant, look at what you said in the budget narrative, what you said you were going to pay matching funds for, and that should match there. And again, it's great to go over. That's fine. Going under because you've got full funding is an issue. You can't. And also the other reason for a big project, if you go under a lot, let's say you got 40% funding instead of 50% funding because your project was so big. Well, now let's say you scale your project back because everything went over. And what happens is your allocation, the amount you're awarded won't change. So the percentage changes. So now instead of getting a 40% award, maybe you got a 60% award. Well, that's not fair. That's not how it was all to the other libraries. So that's the other thing. And nobody's trying to do that. It just happens. And so that's what we're looking for fairness. And I think that's really about it. I'll take questions because I don't want to beat this to death. Are there any questions about the application, the timeline, some of the requirements? I see Chris smiling like she knows everything. She's done it before. Over a dozen times. I really enjoyed this part of my job too, working with this and that, because I was a carpenter, so I always enjoyed seeing these projects that everybody are doing great work.
Tracy's asking, can we start before we get approved?
Absolutely. Yep. Your project, you can start before you're approved. Your project can't be finished before September 1st. Which speaks to, I mean, if you're on the ball and you know what you're doing, I mean, you can, you know, again, I'm going to point out Beverly at Port Jervis. This will be, I think, the 7th application in a row. Took a year off, and then there's 3 before that. So she has utilized this program to its fullest degree and is ready every year with an application. So yeah, good for you.
So could you buy chairs now or?
Yeah, as long as
And
your
it just- it
project
doesn't-
is not complete.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be that you show an invoice for chairs that were purchased. Okay,
Because when you close out the paperwork, it's going to ask you for the encumbrance or the check. Right, so that's that. If it's way in advance and it's the whole project, that might raise a flag. If you paid the whole project on, you know, May 5th.
wow.
Well, if there are no other questions,
Right,
then
you have another question.
Okay.
Chris saying, I have a question or two. What impact statement should be used for one retrofitting a roof and employee parking deck?
so impact statements. So what were the projects again? Repairing the roof?
An employee parking deck.
Retrofitting roof and employee parking deck.
Well, for the roof, we're gonna say it's more efficient utilization of the building and energy efficiency. And that chances are when you do a new roof, there's maybe some insulation that's going in. And so you just energy efficiency and or increased effectiveness of library services because we don't have leaks. Right? So, and the same thing with the parking lot. I think it will be increased effectiveness of library services by improving the building space and capacity. So you're improving building space. There's no safety in here, right? Almost, there's not many provisions in geographically economic areas. So usually it's one of the 3. Yep. And I find here's where you do have to be a little creative sometimes. But again, I've never seen any of this kickback. So as long as we sound reasonable, it'll be fine.
Stephen, this is Claudia. I have a question. So if we're doing a project, our roof here, actually at both buildings, we're going to do 2 projects, but our roof here needs to be rehabilitated. There's leaks and that kind of thing. But I'd also like to add in sort of the engineer or surveying costs for a project that I want to do next year, which is something we talked about a few years ago related to the emergency exit on our mid-level. Like there's no egress that gets you anywhere. So I know I need to have an engineer come in to look at the slope of the hill and figure out how that could work. So could I include I could do a lot of those things, right? I could like put them all into a single grant.
No.
The roof
If
and
the
then,
engineering or the architectural fees do not relate to the project for which you're applying for, they don't qualify.
okay, so they'd have to be included in the same, so next year's project could be the engineer's fees plus the actual doing of that same project. Okay, I wasn't
But
sure.
only if the engineering fees were incurred from January 1st of 2022.
Okay, so we will do that.
That's the start of the cycle. Right. So if you got to, this is why with RCLS, I waited, you know, until this year to engage the engineers and stuff because to make them qualify. So and let me throw out New City here. So they've got a big project, right? So they've been working with their engineers and architects for a while. So they have, you know, tens and tens of thousands of dollars in fees. Only the fees of the engineering that's going to relate to what they apply for, and let's assume it's foundations and demolition, only those fees that were incurred from January 1st through the course of the cycle can be included in this grant, right? So there's no fees for doing overall planning or looking at things like that. It just has to be related to the project you're applying for, just like the furniture, right? So if you're doing a new meeting room, you can get furniture for that meeting room, but it doesn't mean you can get furniture now in the circulation area. It can only be furniture for the meeting room.
But on the same grant, could I put, for this year, could I put the roof rent rehabilitation and also changing out a window as all part of the same?
Yes.
Because they're not related items, but they're still
Construction.
construction. It's okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yep. Yes. And your particular project too is you have to keep in mind, just like last year with the LEDs in 2 locations, those are separate projects. It's not, you can't be over on one and under on one. They're separate projects that are managed independently. So you're right. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Well, I look forward to questions. Please feel free if you have a question, call, email.
You have one more question, Stephen. I noticed you signed in with a password. How do we actually start this, Joyce?
I believe right on the home page.
Okay, Stephen, do we go, this is Joyce. Do we go in then with what we would normally do for our annual report?
No, it's a different login, and you have
Oh,
to,
figures.
yeah, you have to request that login from New York State. And let me just, yeah. Who's asking that question? Is that Joyce? Or,
This is Joyce and Roscoe.
okay, I'm going to email you a link where you can ask the state for login credentials.
Thank you.
Anybody who's ever applied before, it's the same login credentials. They don't change.
Yeah, I can remember that.
So how do I send login? Okay. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Well, thank you for attending. We'll be sending out CE certificates for this. Everybody who needs them. And feel free to call. That's why I'm here. I'm here to help you guys.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day, everybody.
I don't even know if you can hear me.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, thanks.
This didn't last until 12.
Bye, thanks.